everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. Today we have episode 477 for April 20th, 2026. I'm your host, as always, Gary Parker, and we have a big news show for you today. Not big in the sense that there's a lot of articles, big in the sense there's a lot of really big topics to cover, and we're going to talk a lot about AI today. There have been some developments in the AI space in the last week or two that deserve some special attention. Before we get into the rundown, first of all, the Internet Archive, the Wayback Machine, is about to be kneecapped. It's an amazing tool. It has been fantastic for journalists, myself included, and there is a lot of pushback right now from newspapers and other sources that don't like their material being included there. So we need to support this project and push back against these news organizations. I understand where they're coming from. I get it. But this tool is really important for transparency and, honestly, democracy. We need to be able to go back and see historical posts in social media and websites that were changed, news articles that were changed. It's important to have that incremental history to go back and look at. Anyway, they have an open letter that I have signed as a journalist. I'm not sure when my name will get added to the list, but I've submitted the form. Though they're also taking signatures from authors, and I'm going to try to sign that petition too. I've sent them an email. I couldn't find a place to do it online, so I've sent the organizers an email. If you're interested, there are links in the show notes. But a lot of big-name journalists and authors have signed on to these petitions. So anyway, I wanted you to know what was happening and give you the opportunity to take some action if you were interested. Also, just a quick update, Netgear, one of the big U.S. router makers, has been given a pass by the FCC on their ban all routers edict for reasons unknown. In other words, they've been granted an exception to the incredibly stupid and poorly thought out U.S. ban on all non-U.S. routers, which is basically all routers. It's dumb. They're going to have to change it or amend it or something. It was done really fast, like over the course of a weekend without any input. That's going to have to change. Okay, so we do have a new show for you today. We're going to start off with the EU app that has been put out to get everybody's age. It's kind of fresh out of the shop, and it's got lots of problems, like privacy and security problems. Also, there was an article that you may have caught about the FBI saying that they extracted a suspect's deleted signal messages from their phone. I want to explain what really happened there. Also, I mentioned a while back that at the start of the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran, that the initial bombing that eliminated so many of the leaders of the country was assisted by hacking into lots of traffic cams, which were helpfully everywhere in Iran, to target these people. And now we've got a good article that explains some of that, and I want to definitely talk about the implications. Also related, there has been an uptick, as expected, as I predicted, as others predicted, in Iranian hackers trying to target American critical infrastructure. And then we've got a couple articles about some really intrusive web tracking. One from LinkedIn, which whenever you go to their website, they've got a built-in scanner that looks for more than 6,000 different browser extensions that you have on your device and tries to fingerprint your device. And also, some researchers dug deep into the TikTok and Meta or Facebook pixel tracker, which we're going to talk about why it's not really a pixel anymore. But it was also equally astounding in the amount of information that they're gathering, whether you are a TikTok or a Facebook subscriber or not. Also, Section 702, if you've heard of that. This is part of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA law. It does sunset periodically, and it is due to sunset like right now. And normally in the past, it's kind of been a rubber stamp thing to just authorize it to continue. We've had some minor reforms over the years, but this year we finally seem to be sticking up for privacy rights and this overly broad surveillance permission granted by this system. And so we're going to talk about where that stands right now. Also, some good news from India. They were proposing to put a government app on everybody's phone that would do a lot of tracking, and that has been struck down, at least for now. And then we've got two articles. And I wrote a blog article this week that you could go read on my website, and there'll be a link, of course, in the show notes, and it's going to be the basis for my tip of the week, about the promise and perils of modern AI. And so we're going to have two articles that really hit both of those notes, and then I am going to talk about this new product from Anthropic called Mythos, and why there has been such a hubbub over its, well, not quite release, its existence, honestly. So there's a lot to talk about there, and we're going to get philosophical about that today. So lots to do. Let's get right to it. All right, first up, this is from Politico, and it's about the EU's new age verification app. The European Union's unveiling of a mobile app to check people's age online has quickly turned sour as cybersecurity experts found glaring privacy and security problems with the code. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen presented the age verification tool in Brussels on Wednesday, and I think this was last Wednesday, saying it was, quote-unquote, technically ready and will soon be available to use as countries move to ban kids from social media. And this is a quote from von der Leyen, who said, quote, "It's fully open source. Everyone can check the code," unquote. Cyber and privacy experts immediately dove into the source code on the GitHub software platform and reported several issues with the app's design. The saga is turning into a PR disaster for Brussels, but underneath the controversy over the code lie deeper divisions between privacy campaigners, child rights groups, tech firms, and politicians over how to protect minors online, as leaders promise to shield kids from social media and porn sites. Within hours of the EU's app release, security consultant Paul Moore found it could store sensitive data on the user's phone and leave it unprotected. Moore claimed to have hacked the app in under 2 minutes. Baptiste Robert, a prominent French white hat hacker, confirmed many of the issues and told Politico it was possible to bypass the app's biometric authentication features, meaning someone would be able to forego entering a PIN code or using Touch ID to access the app. Oliver Blazy, a cryptographic researcher who was part of a French task force on digital identity, said, quote, "Let's say I downloaded the app, proved that I'm over 18, then my nephew can take my phone, unlock my app, and use it to prove that he's over 18, unquote. The European Commission on Friday stood by its statement that the app is technically ready, and this according to chief spokesperson Paula Pinho, who said, quote, "Yes, it is ready. Maybe we can add, and it will always be improved," unquote. Digital spokesperson Thomas Rainier said, quote, "Now, when we say it's a final version, it's still a demo version," unquote. He said the final product is not yet available for citizens and that, quote, "the code will be constantly updated and improved. I cannot today exclude or prejudge if further updates will be required or not," unquote. The European Commission on Thursday told Politico in a statement that the hackers were probing an earlier demo version of the app that was released for testing and development purposes. The vulnerability was fixed, it said. But both Moore and Blazy said they were conducting their tests on the latest version of the EU's code online. The online row over the EU's app reveals a fierce divide on how to handle internet users' access to everything from porn sites to social media platforms. The EU and many of its member countries are in the middle of rolling out ways to check people's ages online, driven by a political push to better protect kids on the internet. The European Commission in 2024 opened a €4 million tender for the age verification app late last year, which was won by Swedish digital identity company, and I'm going to get this wrong, Citalis, anyway, and Deutsche Telekom. The app allows users to verify their age via their passport, a national ID, or via trusted providers like a bank. Tech platforms can ask the app if a person is over a certain age, but wouldn't have access to more personal data. It's what's known as a zero-knowledge proof method aimed at preserving privacy. But critics of age blocks say the technology to check people's ages with proper privacy and data protections just isn't ready. And even if it was, internet users would easily bypass it with things like virtual private networks, VPNs, that mask their location. Blazy was part of a group of more than 400 privacy and security experts who sent an open letter to the Commission in March to impose a, quote, moratorium on deployment plans until the scientific consensus settles on the benefits and harms that age assurance technologies can bring and on the technical feasibility of such a deployment, unquote. Okay, so look, age-gating content on the internet just won't solve the problems that they are trying to solve, and it's going to cause other serious problems. Like, just for one example, preventing or even criminalizing access to potentially life-saving information and supportive communities by humans who happen to be under the arbitrary age limit. Also, as we've seen time and time again, these technical roadblocks can almost always be circumvented. So we're putting our sensitive identity information at risk and giving up our anonymity on the internet for very questionable benefits. Now, look, I understand that they're trying to do the zero knowledge proof thing. They're trying to just check whether someone meets a certain age limit or not. But still, behind all of that is somebody had to prove who they were. In other words, give their full identity, not just their age. And that information is sitting somewhere and was accessed by some number of companies and could therefore be leaked. So we need law enforcement to find and prosecute the bad guys instead of foisting this privacy nightmare on every connected human being. All right, next up, this is from 404 Media. And I don't know if this hit the mainstream news or not, but basically, what it looked like, if you looked at it just quickly, was that the FBI was able to extract signal messages from somebody's phone, and we all think, oh my goodness, Signal's the gold standard for encryption. How could that happen? But it didn't break encryption. So let me read this article, and I'll give you my take. The FBI was able to forensically extract copies of incoming signal messages from a defendant's iPhone even after the app was deleted, because copies of the content were saved in the device's push notification database. Multiple people present for FBI testimony in a recent trial told 404 Media. The case involved a group of people setting off fireworks and vandalizing property at the ICE Prairieland detention facility in Alvarado, Texas in July, and one shooting a police officer in the neck. I assume they mean the fireworks shot him in the neck, not like a bullet. Anyway, the news shows how forensic extraction, when someone has physical access to a device and is able to run specialized software on it, can yield sensitive data derived from secure messaging apps in unexpected places. Signal already has a setting that blocks message content from displaying in push notifications. The case highlights why such a feature might be important for some users to turn on. And this is a quote from a supporter of the defendants that was taking notes, I guess that gave 404 the info with that they reported on here, who said, quote, "We learned that specifically on iPhones, if one's settings in the Signal app allow for message notifications and previews to show up on the lock screen, then the iPhone will internally store those notifications and message previews in the internal memory of the device," unquote. One of the defendants was Lynette Sharp, who previously pleaded guilty to providing material support to terrorists. During one day of the related trial, FBI Special Agent Clark Wythorne testified about some of the collected evidence. A summary of Exhibit 158, published on a group of supporters' website, says, quote, "Messages were recovered from Sharp's phone through Apple's internal notification storage. Signal had been removed, but incoming notifications were preserved in internal memory. Only incoming messages were captured, no outgoing," unquote. Typically, when a user receives a Signal message, their phone will display a push notification announcing that they have received a message, and display the sender and at least some of the message content. In the notifications menu under Settings in the Signal app, users can change what notification content appears. This includes name, content, and actions. Or you could do name only and no name or content. In other words, nothing. Those are your three settings options. The issue of notifications saving some message data is likely not limited to the Signal app, but is a more fundamental friction between secure messaging apps and how Apple stores notifications. Authorities have turned to push notifications more broadly as an investigative strategy, too. In June, 404 Media reported Apple gave governments data on thousands of push notifications. Those were legal demands made to Apple, while the Prairieland case was about data from a device authorities had physical access to. Okay, first and foremost, this is not a flaw in Signal's end-to-end encryption. All Signal messages are necessarily decrypted at both ends, right? If you need to send it or receive it, at that point, you need to be able to read it as a human. So end-to-end encryption doesn't mean that it's encrypted forever. It only means it's encrypted between the two ends, the sender and the receiver. So therefore, on the device must exist an unencrypted version of all the messages you send and receive. Okay, so second, physical access to someone's device, particularly if that device can be unlocked, generally means the game is over anyway, from a security standpoint. It would be like trying to secure the device against yourself, the owner, right? I mean, if you can get into the phone, then you can get into everything. So now this does demonstrate why you might not want to allow Signal messages to be shown on your lock screen or these notification pop-ups. And that setting, which this article talks about, is available to everyone, not just for Signal, but for every app on your phone. So we've learned today in this article that that information can be stored in the phone and is retrievable by somebody else if they have physical access to your phone. And it didn't really say in the article, but if they could unlock your phone, or maybe if they could force a backup of your phone and then maybe go through the backup. It's not really clear exactly how they got it, even though they had possession of the phone. But certainly if they could unlock the phone and get into it, then they would have the opportunity to pull the data off the phone and look into this notification storage, which apparently is a little database that Apple runs on all their devices. And I think this is the crucial part. Apple really should delete any notifications that are sitting in that database on the phone if somebody deletes the app from the phone. And I'm just going to guess that Apple will probably do that soon. But I also want you to know that it's not sufficient just for you to do this, right? For you to take these precautions. You could be completely careful of all this stuff. Delete your messages all the time, not display any of these things. So your phone is totally clean. And even if someone were to get a hold of it, they wouldn't be able to, find these old messages on your phone, especially if you've deleted the app. Great. How about the person you sent those messages to? They need to do everything as well. And if it's a group chat, well, then that just gets multiplied by everybody in the group chat. So these apps are not perfect. In fact, the final point I want to make here is that I think this just shows that we don't need to ban end-to-end encryption. The police in this case were able to search the defendant's phone, probably by obtaining a warrant signed by a judge, and get the information they needed. These people in this suit were convicted. It worked without breaking end-to-end encryption. All right, let's move on. All right, this next one is from the Associated Press, and it's an article about something that I mentioned maybe in passing in previous weeks when the war with Iran broke out. Because at that time I said that one of the reasons they were able to find all these leaders in one place at one time is that Israel had hacked into all of the traffic cams and were using them to surveil the people that they were targeting inside Iran. This article explains that. Okay, the role of Israel's hijacking of Iran's street cameras and the killing of the country's supreme leader underscores how surveillance systems are increasingly being targeted by adversaries in wartime. Hundreds of millions of cameras have been installed above shops, in homes, and on street corners around the world, many connected to the internet and poorly secured. Recent advances in artificial intelligence have enabled militaries and intelligence agencies to sift through vast amounts of surveillance footage and identify targets. On February 28th, Israel vividly demonstrated the potential of such systems to be hacked and used against adversaries when Israel tracked down Iranian leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei with the help of Tehran's own street cameras, despite repeated warnings that Iran's surveillance systems had been compromised, according to interviews and an Associated Press review of leaked data, public statements, and news reports. The use of hacked surveillance cameras, among other intelligence, in the operation to kill Khamenei was described to the AP by an intelligence official with knowledge of the operation and another person who was briefed on the operation. Neither was authorized to speak with the media, and both shared information on condition of anonymity. Iran has installed tens of thousands of cameras in its capital in response to waves of protests, most recently in January when massive nationwide demonstrations ended in a bloody crackdown that killed many thousands of Iranians. That Tehran's cameras were compromised was no secret. The city's cameras were repeatedly hacked starting in 2021, and last year a senior Iranian politician warned publicly that cameras had been compromised by Israel, posing a national security threat. Connor Healy, director of research at surveillance research publication IPVM, said Khamenei's killing illustrates a pressing security dilemma for governments seeking to quash dissent. And he says, quote, "The irony is that the infrastructure authoritarian states build to make their rule unassailable may be what makes their leaders most visible to the people trying to kill them. Do you trust who is watching?" Unquote. For years, cybersecurity experts have warned that cameras could be hacked for war. In 2019, security engineer Paul Marapisi discovered he could easily hack millions of cameras from the comfort of his home in California. Companies have advertised cameras hooked up online, accessible with cell phones, with feeds easily diverted by hackers. Many are installed with minimal security by unsophisticated users who fail to set up passwords or install security patches. Securing cameras takes constant vigilance, but hacking them takes identifying just one exposed vulnerability, such as an outdated system or a generic password like 1234. Even surveillance systems set up by governments on networks sealed off from the internet are vulnerable. It just takes one insider turncoat to compromise such systems. For many years, hacking cameras for war remained theoretical. But in 2023, Hamas hacked surveillance cameras in southern Israel ahead of its October 7 attack, allowing the group to monitor Israeli army patrols and assisting the attack, according to Israeli media. That same year, a Ukrainian official told reporters that Russia attempted to hijack cameras near missile targets, a trend that continued in 2024 when Russians hacked cameras in Kyiv, and last year when they hacked cameras at border crossings. Experts say advances in AI have allowed militaries to overcome a critical hurdle in weaponizing hacked footage, sifting through huge amounts of video to identify people, vehicles, and other targets, a task that once took teams of analysts weeks or months, but can now be done in real time. With a simple keyword search, AI can scan feeds and return results almost immediately. All right, first of all, we need to understand that surveillance cuts both ways, right? I mean, the Iranian leaders put these cameras everywhere to keep tabs on their citizens. And it turns out that they were hacked and used to keep track on the leaders themselves, to their ultimate demise. Second, we really should be thinking twice about connecting our surveillance systems to the internet or allowing them to be run by third parties that centralize so much data into a single juicy place. Our old security systems were purely local, like old CCTV cameras. They were wired into a box in the back room that was probably connected to a VCR. And, those tapes were overwritten every few days or maybe every few weeks, but they never left the building. Now, all of our cameras are online, which is making them vulnerable to attack from any place on the planet. And oftentimes, they're being routed to third-party security companies for monitoring or whatever, and then that just provides even more ways in which this data and these feeds could be hacked into. But here's the bigger thing that we need to be thinking about. Living in a panopticon where everything you do is seen and heard, no matter where you go, even if that data is perfectly secured, which is not possible, is still a privacy nightmare with deep sociological and psychological impacts. We act differently when we think we might be surveilled. And that's not a good thing. And it's also just plain dangerous to democracy. And it creates a nearly insurmountable power balance by the people who own or can get into those cameras. It's really just bad for democracy. And of course, those same surveillance systems, as we've just seen, can be hacked and turned against their owners. So it bites both ways. So it's something that people advocating for more surveillance should keep in mind. These systems can absolutely be used against us. All right, next up, this is from TechCrunch, and it's from Zach Whitaker, who reports for TechCrunch and does other things too. I really need to see if I can't get Zach on the podcast. I've used a lot of his material over the years, and he's done some good work. I'd love to have him on the show. But anyway, today we're going to talk about Iranian hackers targeting U.S. infrastructure. The U.S. government is warning that Iran-backed hackers are escalating their tactics by targeting American critical infrastructure systems with the aim of causing disruption. In a joint advisory published Tuesday, the FBI, the National Security Agency, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, and the U.S. Department of Energy collectively warned that Iranian government hackers have been exploiting internet-facing systems used across a range of sectors. These include water and wastewater utilities, as well as energy and local government facilities. The agencies did not specifically name any of the targets, but said that the hacks were aimed at causing, quote, disruptive effects within the United States, unquote, and had already resulted in operational disruption and financial loss. The hackers targeted programmable logic controllers and supervisory control and data acquisition products, or SCADA, that's SCADA, which are used to control and manage industrial equipment and systems in critical infrastructure operations, the agency said. The agency said that the hackers were able to manipulate information displayed on these devices and maliciously interact with project files that store important device configurations. The agency said that the hacks targeting critical infrastructure are a marked escalation in tactics by Iranian hackers, likely in response to the U.S.-Israeli war with Iran, which began on February 28th with airstrikes that killed the country's leader. The advisory also comes shortly after U.S. President Donald Trump threatened Iran in a social media post earlier on Tuesday, and this was a week or two ago, writing, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, unquote, if Iran does not capitulate to a deal with the United States to open the Strait of Hormuz, a key choke point for global shipping traffic, by end of day. Since the start of the war, an Iranian government-backed hacking group called Handala has been linked to several high-profile cyber attacks, including a disruptive breach at U.S. medical tech giant Stryker, which saw the hackers remotely wipe thousands of employee devices using the company's own security tools. The FBI recently blamed Handala hackers for leaking the partial contents of FBI Director Kash Patel's private email account, and Iran has also hit several U.S.-owned and operated data centers across the region with missiles and airstrikes, causing instability and disruption to cloud services across the region. All right, so as predicted, not just by me, but by others, the conflict with Iran would accelerate cyber attacks against the U.S. and Israel as well, of course. It is definitely happening, but there hasn't been any really headline success yet, but that may yet be coming. But also, I'll recall the 3 different interviews I did last year on the vulnerabilities of our critical infrastructure with the likes of Josh Corman, Jake Braun, and the folks at the Cyber Resilience Corps. We focused a lot on the threat from China as preparation for an invasion of Taiwan, but these same systems are vulnerable to any attacker. And with the advent of AI tools, this threat will increase substantially in the coming months. We'll get back to that a little bit later in the show. All right, this next article is from the Next Web, and it's really disturbing and just crazy, honestly. LinkedIn has been scanning your computer whenever you go there with your web browser for lots of different extensions that you might have installed, like literally thousands, and also trying very hard to fingerprint your device. And of course, they have reasons for this, but it's still very creepy. So let me read this and then we'll talk about it. There is a routine that runs on your computer every time you open LinkedIn. You cannot see it, you were not told about it, and it is not described in the company's privacy policy. According to an investigation published in early April 2026 by Fairlinked EV, a European Association of Commercial LinkedIn Users, the platform injects a 2.7 megabyte JavaScript bundle, which, by the way, for any web-based JavaScript bundle is pretty darn big, into its website that silently scans visitors' browsers for the presence of more than 6,000 specific Chrome extensions, assembles a detailed fingerprint of their hardware, encrypts it, and transmits the results to LinkedIn's servers, where it is attached to every subsequent action taken during the session. The investigation, independently confirmed by Bleep Computer, which verified the scanning behavior through its own testing, has been dubbed BrowserGate. LinkedIn disputes many of the report's characterizations. However, the technical facts are not in dispute. LinkedIn calls its scanning system spectroscopy. When a user loads the LinkedIn website, the script fires off up to 6,222 simultaneous requests, each one probing for a specific browser extension by attempting to access files associated with that extension's ID. The presence or absence of a file in the response indicates whether the extension is installed. The entire operation runs silently in the background without a visible prompt or notification of any kind. Beyond extensions, the script collects 48 distinct characteristics of the user's device: the CPU core count, available memory, screen resolution, time zone, language settings, battery status, audio hardware information, and storage capacity, among others. Individually, these attributes are unremarkable. Combined, they form a device fingerprint specific enough to identify a user even after cookies are cleared. Once compiled, the data is serialized to JSON, that's just a data format, and encrypted using an RSA public key. LinkedIn's internal identifier for the key is APCFCDFPK, in case you're looking for it, before being transmitted to telemetry points, including li/track and platform telemetry/li/APFCDF. The fingerprint is then permanently injected as an HTTP header into every API request made during the session, meaning LinkedIn receives it with every search, every profile view, every message sent. The question of which extensions LinkedIn is scanning for makes the surveillance more sensitive than simple fraud detection would require. According to the BrowserGate report, LinkedIn's list includes more than 200 products that compete directly with its own sales tools, among them Apollo, Lusha, and Zoom Info. Because LinkedIn knows the employer of each registered user, because just quick timeout, if you've never used LinkedIn, it's a professional service where people network for jobs, basically. So one of the key parts of that is listing where you are currently employed and whether or not you're looking for employment. Okay, then systematically scanning for the presence of a competitor's tool gives the platform visibility into which companies are evaluating or deploying rival products. The list also reportedly includes tools associated with neurodivergent conditions, religious practice, political interests, and job hunting activity, categories that, in the European Union, qualify as sensitive personal data subject to heightened protection under the GDPR, or General Data Protection Regulation. Knowing that a user is running a job search extension, for instance, is a meaningful inference about their employment intentions drawn without consent. The scale of the operation has grown substantially over time. LinkedIn began scanning for 38 specific extensions in 2017. By 2024, that number had grown to 461. By February 2026, the list had reached 6,167, a 1,252% increase in 2 years. Bleeping Computer's testing confirmed the scanning was active as of early April 2026. LinkedIn's response to Bleeping Computer was pointed, and this is a quote from a spokesperson who said, quote, "The claims made on the website linked here are plain wrong. The person behind them is subject to an account restriction for scraping and other violations of LinkedIn's terms of service. To protect the privacy of our members, their data, and to ensure site stability, we do look for extensions that scrape data without members' consent or otherwise violate LinkedIn's terms of service," unquote. And the company added that it does not use the data to infer sensitive information about members. The platform's characterization of the source matters. Fairlinked EV is connected to Teamfluence Signals Systems, OU, an Estonian company whose managing directors include Stephen Morel and Jan Liebling. Teamfluence makes a Chrome extension, also called Teamfluence, that LinkedIn restricted for alleged terms of service violations. The company subsequently filed a preliminary injunction against LinkedIn Ireland Unlimited Company and LinkedIn Germany GmbH at the Regional Court of Munich, alleging violations of the Digital Markets Act, EU competition law, and German data protection rules. In January of 2026, the Munich court denied the injunction, finding that LinkedIn's actions did not constitute unlawful obstruction or discrimination. The financial dispute between the parties does not change the technical findings, which were verified independently. It does mean the framing of those findings is contested, and readers should weigh both the substance of the claim and its provenance. LinkedIn is a Microsoft subsidiary, acquired in 2016 for $26.2 billion. Microsoft has been aggressively expanding its AI capabilities in 2026, with LinkedIn's vast dataset of professional identity and employment history forming a significant part of the data infrastructure on which those capabilities rest. The relationship between LinkedIn's data collection practices and Microsoft's broader AI ambitions is not addressed in LinkedIn's privacy policy either. LinkedIn has more than 1 billion registered users. The majority access the platform through Chrome-based browsers, meaning the spectroscopy scan runs routinely on the devices of a significant fraction of the global professional workforce, collecting a fingerprint that is precise enough to persist across cookie resets and potentially across devices. Short of using a non-Chromium browser such as Firefox, which would limit but not necessarily eliminate LinkedIn's fingerprinting capabilities, there is no user-facing setting that prevents the scanning. The platform does not offer an opt-out because it does not disclose the practice in the first place. Whether regulators move quickly enough to change that default at LinkedIn's scale remains to be seen. Security firms increasingly built to detect exactly this kind of covert data harvesting are becoming a growth sector in their own right. A market indicator that the gap between what the platforms collect and what users understand is still very wide. The year 2025 normalized AI-powered data collection at a pace that regulation has yet to match. BrowserGate is a case study in what that lag looks like from the inside of a browser. All right, so why is LinkedIn doing all of this? Well, unfortunately, that answer is very easy. Because they can. Now, maybe this will turn out to run afoul of some privacy laws like the GDPR in the EU or the CCPA in California, for example. But it may just come down to notice of consent, meaning LinkedIn can do it as long as they tell you about it and then convince you to say that it's okay, which they do through all sorts of funky dark patterns and tricky ways. It's quite possible you will eventually agree to this just by continuing to use the service. After they send you an email saying, hey, we've updated our privacy policy, take a look at it, but if you're cool with it, just keep using it and you will have agreed to it. So it's it's just getting worse, folks. We need comprehensive privacy regulations, and we need them ASAFP. Yeah, I put the F in there. So the obvious next question is, what can you do to prevent this LinkedIn scanning? Well, here's the problem. This is really what we would call first-party scanning. So it's honestly very difficult to prevent. It's coming from the site that you're actually visiting, which makes it difficult for privacy, protecting browsers like Brave and Firefox to block it. Same thing is true for plugins like uBlock Origin. The best defense I can think of right now is to use a totally different browser for social media, including LinkedIn, a browser with minimal plugins installed. There are lots of browsers out there. There's even lots of privacy browsers out there to choose from. You might just want to keep a second one on hand and dedicate it for this purpose. Within a given browser, yes, you can do account containers. Firefox has this capability, which is very nice. And that can silo some of this information, but that's maybe not sufficient. Also, you could try private browsing mode, and in a lot of browsers, you can select which plugins are available to you in private browsing mode, so you could turn a lot of them off, which makes you less fingerprintable. There's honestly not a lot of great options here, because again, this really comes down to it being a first-party tracking situation, which makes it harder for tools that protect your privacy to kind of filter out. So as long as ads and tracking technology require third parties, we can configure privacy-respecting browsers, or even a private DNS service like NextDNS, to block them. It's pretty straightforward. Honestly, though, given the success of first-party ads and tracking, I'm really worried that these ad companies and data brokers are going to start finding creative ways to make their ads and tracking operate in a first-party way. They're actually already doing this to some extent now. There's a technical term for this called CNAME flattening, where they can make it appear to all be coming from the original site, the first-party site. But I really think that this is where they're going to end up eventually. It's a lot harder to block, and so therefore, as people find ways to block third-party tracking, moving to first-party tracking just makes sense for them, unfortunately. So therefore, I think we're going to start seeing more of that. All right, next up, this is from Secure World, and it calls it the pixel trap. How online marketing is a silent PII, or personally identifiable information harvesting machine. All right, so for years, the cybersecurity community has viewed tracking pixels as a marketing problem, a necessary snippet of code for ad attribution and conversion tracking. However, a new forensic report from Jay Scrambler called Beyond Analytics, the silent collection of commercial intelligence by TikTok and Meta ad pixels, suggests that the humble pixel has evolved into something far more predatory. The report reveals that TikTok and Meta's pixels, and they're not really pixels anymore. I'll talk about that at the end, but we still call them that. Their pixels are methodically harvesting granular personal data and commercial intelligence that far exceeds what is required for ad performance. For security professionals, this marks a critical shift. The marketing stack is now a primary vector for unmanaged data exfiltration. The investigation found that these pixels don't just track clicks. They build persistent identities through deterministic hashing of emails, phone numbers, and physical addresses, which we, by the way, talked about in the interview with Zach and Aisha. And because these hashes are built from predictable data, they allow platforms to re-identify users and build long-term behavioral profiles without their explicit knowledge, effectively killing anonymous browsing. Here are some of the findings at a glance. First, commercial intelligence. Pixels are capturing product names, unit prices, quantities, and the exact structure of checkout forms. 2. PII harvesting. TikTok was observed capturing physical addresses from store locator fields even before a user provided consent, and in some cases even after they clicked reject all. And 3, payment data risk. Meta's automatic events features scan page elements to capture cardholder names and the last 4 digits of credit cards by default. For consumers, this is the death of anonymity. For the average user, the reject all button on a cookie banner has become a false sense of security. The report highlights a consent gap where tracking happens at the runtime level, bypassing the browser's UI, or user interface. Consumers are being shadow profiled where their real-world identity, their physical address and phone number, is tied to their digital commerce journey across the web. Marketers, meanwhile, are trying to find the secret sauce for reaching and influencing consumers. Marketers often implement these pixels to optimize spend, but they may be inadvertently handing over their competitive advantage by sharing granular checkout data like SKUs, pricing strategies, and consumer journey maps, which is like, the chronological order of how a person progressed through a set of web pages on somebody's site. Merchants are feeding the very platforms that help their larger rivals. You aren't just buying ads, you're providing your competitors' AI models with a play-by-play of your business logic. And this is a quote from the report. It says, quote, "Both TikTok and Meta's pixel code can load and begin transmitting data before the website's consent management system has time to block it, meaning information can leave the browser before the user's choice is applied. Even more concerning is that data may be transmitted in clear text, occasionally written with the request URL itself, exposing sensitive information to browser histories, server logs, intermediaries, and debugging tools. This vulnerability stems not only from the Pixel's data collection methods, but also from misconfigurations during the Pixel's implementation or issues with the underlying architecture of the website. Consequently, the attack surface is significantly broader than a surface-level analysis suggests." And finally, it says, "The JScambler report confirms that the boundary between analytics and surveillance has dissolved." All right, so first of all, again, these trackers are no longer really just pixels, even though we keep calling them that. So in the old days, a tracking pixel used to literally be a 1-by-1 pixel image, in other words, 1 pixel high and 1 pixel wide, that you generally couldn't see, not just because it was small, but oftentimes they were rendered in an invisible thing. They were basically transparent. And when this image was loaded, each of these little tracking pixels were given a globally unique name, so that when the web page asked the far end, "Hey, give me this image so I could show it to this person," they could look at that unique ID and say, "Oh yeah, great, we put that on Carrie's page, so that means Carrie just opened this," if they knew who I was. Or if nothing else, they at least know, okay, this person viewed this web page or this email. By the way, a lot of emails have these in them as well, which is why a lot of email apps don't show images by default. When that image is loaded, it'll remember when that image was called for. So in other words, that's probably when the person read the web page or the email, and also what IP address that came from. Those are the quaint old days. That's what a pixel used to be. Now it's no longer really an image pixel. Now it's a JavaScript library that's downloaded whenever you use some of Meta's or TikTok's software development kits, let's say. Or if you just want to earn money, a lot of times they say, "Yeah, okay, fine, just put our little pixel on there and we'll give you a kickback." So now these trackers are full-fledged software libraries that perform a truly astonishing amount of data gathering. This article, by the way, goes into more detail. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, check it out. But it's also important to note that this is happening whether or not you have a TikTok or Facebook account. These are the shadow profiles that they were talking about. They're tracking everybody. Now, the good news is that, unlike the LinkedIn case, these types of trackers can be stopped using a privacy-respecting browser like Brave or Firefox, particularly with the uBlock Origin plugin installed. These are things I've been recommending for years. And crucially, this is one of the main reasons why I recommend you do this. Stop using Chrome for the love of all that's good, and please find a privacy-respecting browser. I've got articles on my website you can find that gives other examples if you don't like Brave or Firefox, but there's way better options than Chrome. Please find one. Okay, well, it's not all bad news. We've got a couple stories, one definitely good, one potentially good. First of all, let's start off with a little update on Section 702. And this is from Wired. This is actually ongoing right now. So if this is something that you feel strongly about, now is the time to engage with your representatives. And I'll tell you how to do that. But first, let me get you up to date on what's going on. All right, this is from Wired. House Speaker Mike Johnson convened a vote in the dead of night on Friday, calling lawmakers back to the floor after midnight in a push to preserve a surveillance program that allows federal agents to read the communications of Americans without a warrant. Let that sink in. That's what we're talking about here. 20 Republicans broke ranks and sank it, a sharp rebuke for both Johnson and President Donald Trump, who had spent the week personally working holdouts to back the bill. The failed vote caps weeks of bipartisan resistance to a clean reauthorization of the surveillance program, authorized under Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA. The 702 program permits wiretaps of communications ostensibly belonging to foreigners overseas, but is also able to intercept vast amounts of Americans' emails, texts, phone calls, and other data. private messages that the FBI and other agencies routinely access without a warrant. And that's a link. If you want to follow up that claim, you can check it out there. Congressional authorization of the program will expire on Tuesday, and that's tomorrow. But hold on, we'll get to that. The White House and the GOP leadership have spent weeks pressing for a clean reauthorization, fending off a bipartisan alliance of the House Freedom Caucus Republicans and Progressive Democrats demanding, variously, that the FBI obtain warrants before searching Americans' messages and that Congress ban the government from buying Americans' personal data from commercial brokers. Which, by the way, has recently been confirmed by the head of the FBI that they do, in fact, do. A handful of Democrats led by Congressman Jim Himes of Connecticut, the top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, have joined the White House in lobbying against new restrictions. House Republicans revolted twice in the small hours of Friday morning, ultimately sinking the bill. Shortly after 1 a.m. Eastern Time, a dozen Republicans joined nearly every Democrat to kill a leadership-backed amendment that would have extended Section 702 for 5 more years. And let me just again clarify, this thing does sunset every so often. And so whenever these sunset times come up, whenever it's about to expire, they go through this debate process. And until now, they basically always just said, yeah, sure, let's keep that going for a little while longer and set a new deadline. So that's kind of what they mean there. In a rare defeat on a procedural vote that typically passes along party lines, GOP leaders walked away with only a 10-day extension, pushing the fight till the end of the month. That's end of April. The House's failure leaves the Senate to sort out what comes next, starting with whether to approve the extension next week. The vote's collapse followed a week of hard effort by the Trump administration to assuage Republicans who objected to the FBI's warrantless access and its documented history of querying that data for political purposes. Again, that's a link if you want to check that claim. Trump hosted Freedom Caucus holdouts at the White House on Tuesday, trying to close the deal. Democrats, meanwhile, were briefed Monday by 2 former senior Biden officials urging them to back the extension, according to a person familiar with both events. The FBI has used Section 702 data to run warrantless queries on a U.S. senator, 19,000 donors to a congressional campaign, Black Lives Matter protesters, and both sides of the January 6th Capitol attack, according to declassified court rulings and government transparency reports. Congress's votes on extending Section 702 authority this week were not strictly necessary to keep the program operational in the short term. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, FISC, quietly recertified the program in a classified ruling on March 17th, authorizing collection to continue through March 2027, even if Congress fails to act. Running the program on court authorization alone, with the underlying statute expired, would leave it on politically thin footing, however, and on untested legal ground. Yeah, no kidding. That legal footing depends on an oversight system that is currently in shambles. The surveillance court itself relies on the U.S. Department of Justice to self-report violations. But the agency has been repeatedly rebuked by federal courts over the past year for inaccurate filings. FBI Director Kash Patel has shuttered the Bureau's Office of Internal Auditing, the unit whose data previously surfaced hundreds of thousands of improper searches, and civil service protections for the FBI attorneys and supervisors who approve sensitive queries have been stripped by executive order. According to the New York Times, which first reported the surveillance court's recertification, the same court also found serious compliance problems with how intelligence agencies queried the 702 database, including the so-called filtering tools that allowed analysts to pull up Americans' messages while evading oversight the law requires. The court has reportedly ordered the FBI and other agencies to rebuild the tools or stop using them. According to the Times, the administration is weighing whether to comply or appeal. Senator Ron Wyden, an Oregon Democrat and the Senate Intelligence Committee's most persistent critic of the program, issued a rare cross-chamber letter to House members on Monday, urging them to delay reauthorization until the court's ruling is declassified. And Wyden said, quote, "There are multiple issues related to Section 702 that the American people and many members of Congress have been left in the dark about, including a FISA court opinion from last month that found major compliance problems. These matters should be declassified and openly debated before Section 702 is reauthorized," unquote. In a statement on Tuesday, Wyden named the administration's apparent plan to appeal the ruling rather than comply was, quote, "a highly aggressive and unusual move indicative of an administration that would exploit every angle to expand its surveillance at the expense of Americans' rights," unquote. Okay, so don't have much to add to this. That's a lot of really good information right there, stuff you may not have been aware of. But I will say that I certainly agree with Senator Wyden that this program should be scrapped or seriously reformed. And it has to be more transparent. We have to know what's going on. At least our representatives do, all of them. But really, the public should be as well. This stuff is way too secret, and it needs to, without breaking national security. I get that there are issues around that, but these processes and the things that are going on need to somehow still be bubbled up and made available to the citizens of the United States. Because I'm pretty sure if everybody knew what was really going on here, they would say, no, we can't keep doing it this way. So if you agree, this would be a really good time for you to contact your representatives and let them know that this is a voting issue for you. That's a key thing to put in there because that's what they care about. So if you've never contacted your representatives, it's actually very easy to do these days. And in fact, the EFF has a dedicated website for this specific issue, for Section 702, that you can go to use to find and contact your personal representatives. So look at the show notes for a link to that site. All right, a quick article here from Reuters, and this is a welcome turn of events in India. And it says, India's government has decided not to go ahead with a proposal to require Apple, Samsung, and others to pre-install the country's biometric identification app, Aadhaar, that's Aadhaar, on phones. A state body said on Friday, a move that has been opposed by the smartphone giants. Reuters reported last month that the UIDAI, the state body that operates Aadhaar, had asked the IT ministry in January to engage with Apple, Google, and other leading smartphone makers to consider mandatory pre-installation of the Aadhaar app, a unique 12-digit identity number tied to an individual's fingerprints and iris scans. Aadhaar is held by nearly 1.34 billion residents and is widely used for verification purposes in banking and telecom services, as well as for faster airport entry. India's IT ministry reviewed the proposal and, quote, is not in favor of mandating the pre-installation of the Aadhaar app on smartphones, unquote, the UIDAI said in a statement to Reuters on Friday. It gave no reason for the decision in the statement. India's IT ministry did not respond to Reuters' queries. The Aadhaar request was the sixth time in 2 years the government has sought pre-installation of state apps on phones, according to an industry communications reviewed by Reuters earlier this year. All 6 attempts were opposed by the industry. Smartphone makers flagged concerns about device security and compatibility when they received the Aadhaar preload proposal, and also flagged higher production costs as they would have been required to run separate manufacturing lines for India and export markets, according to documents reviewed by Reuters. Apple and Samsung in particular both had concerns with the proposal due to questions over safety and security, sources told Reuters in March. While the government maintains Aadhaar as safe and secure, the app has faced persistent criticism from privacy advocates, including for data leaks where personal details of millions of holders surfaced on the dark web. Apar Gupta, founder of the Internet Freedom Foundation, a New Delhi-based digital advocacy group, welcomed the government's decision to drop the Aadhaar pre-installation proposal and said other such proposals should also be spiked as they lack legislative foundation and have no public policy goal. And finally, a quote from Gupta who says, quote, hopefully it is a welcome exercise of regulatory restraint that recognizes that citizens carry their phones as extensions of their autonomy, not as vessels for government order, unquote. So, yay. I don't know if these things often come back up and how often they do, but this was something I think I reported on at some point. But anyway, it's good to know that this mandatory app has been nixed for now, at least. Okay, so now for the big 2 stories of the week, and this will blend right into my tip of the week. AI, as honestly, all of us in this industry, certainly privacy industry, but also the tech industry, that cover the news, are really tired of AI. I mean, it's been everywhere. It's like every story has to have some AI angle to it. But honestly, it is kind of the reality that we're in now. The advances in what we call generative AI or Gen AI, when things like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and several others, they really have been very disruptive and in some cases concerning, in other cases very promising. In fact, my article this week, my blog, which is also my tip of the week, I've called AI's Promise and Peril. And we're going to talk about both of those today. And I'm going to start with a good one. I'm going to start with some promise, an article that outlines some really cool things about AI that I bet you had not thought about. And then we're going to talk about the peril. You probably saw in the news all the big to-do about this new Anthropic tool called Mythos, or Claude Mythos, and how dangerous it was, and how Anthropic has decided that it was so dangerous that it could not release it just yet. Not to everybody, anyway. Okay, so let me start with this first story. Again, this is the promise part. This is something that AI, generative AI, is going to be doing, and I think it's really amazing, and it's a good thing. So let me start with this one. It's from Fast Company, and it's from Harry McCracken, who does some great reporting. And it's about he decided he wanted to make his own word processing program, and he vibe coded the whole thing, which is to say, he used an LLM, like I think he used Claude Code in this case, to create custom software for himself. Okay, here's what he says. Over a lifetime of writing, I have used more word processors than I can count. Long defunct obscurities such as Scriptsit and PFS Write, and Quip, which still exists but has been running on fumes for years. And, of course, Microsoft Word and Google Docs, which will surely outlive us all. But I started using my favorite word processor of all time just 6 weeks ago, and I acknowledge that I may be a tad biased. I vibe coded it myself. Anthropic's Claude Code did all the programming based on my ideas, instructions, and questions. I called my web-based word processor DooleyWrite, as in D-O-O-L-E-E, DooleyWrite, a nod to Dooley, the note-taking software I conjured up a year ago. At first, I wasn't positive that trying to get it up and running wasn't the equivalent of trying to design my own car on a whim. But within a couple of nights of furious Claude sessions, the essential features had come into place, and then I thoughtfully added more elements until my wish list had been exhausted. For now, at least, I am DooleyWrite's sole user. But I've already forgotten what the before times were like. By my wholly unscientific estimate, I'm about 20% more productive since I started writing in it, and about 250% happier. Why construct a word processor when the world already has more of them than it knows what to do with? I had one simple reason. It was the only way to get one that felt like it was made for me. My writing projects tend to involve supplementary materials such as transcripts. I start typing with only a rough idea of what I want to say and appreciate help organizing my thoughts and shuffling stuff around. I appreciate tools for maintaining focus, and most of what I create is full of hyperlinks and ends up being published online in WordPress. Microsoft and Google were never going to design a word processor for that specific scenario. But it turned out that it wasn't all that hard. DooleyWrite documents, again, DooleyWrite's the name of the program he wrote for himself. DooleyWrite documents support bundling extras such as text files, PDFs, and audio recordings. There's a built-in outliner that excels at wrangling documents made up from many small chunks, such as my recent oral history of Apple's earliest years. I find the Pomodoro time management system, which I learned about in the 2015 Fast Company article, invaluable for keeping me focused. So I built it in. My functionality for embedding links and copying text as HTML are much nicer than those of any off-the-shelf package I know. To be sure, some of what I came up with is available elsewhere. I certainly drew inspiration from Scrivener, a writer's word processor I once cherished, though its iPad version has barely changed in a decade and desperately needs an update. By making my own DIY word processor, I was able to pick and choose my favorite features and put everything exactly where I want it. It feels like I'm finally wearing my own clothes after a life of ill-fitting hand-me-downs. Virtually any word processor extant would trounce DooleyWrite in a checklist of supported features. For instance, it omits all sorts of theoretically standard formatting options, such as the ability to insert images, not because I couldn't figure out how to implement them, but because I don't need them right now. It never quite dawned on me how distracting unused features are until I jettisoned all of them. On Wall Street, the specter of companies deciding to save money by writing their own apps is known as the SaaSpocalypse. And let me explain. SaaS, S-A-A-S, is software as a service. That is the general industry term for things like Google Docs, for example. But I didn't come up with Duly Right to avoid paying for word processing. Actually, I still subscribe to Word and Docs as part of their respective suites. I'll use them for people that require revision marking and real-time collaboration, neither of which I bothered with in Duly Right. If all vibe coding was good for was churning out knockoffs of existing apps, it would be pretty sad. It's the opportunity to build something better than what's out there for you that makes it worthwhile. As deeply gratifying as I find using my new bespoke word processor and my year-old note-taking app, which I continue to live in as well, I'm not sure if I have more vibe coding productivity software in me. Email might be a contender if I can figure out how to make it compatible with Gmail and Outlook, but I wouldn't know where to begin with a spreadsheet, and I don't have enough gripes with my calendar, Fantastical, to crave life without it. Still, even if Duly Right turns out to be my vibe coding magnum opus, the fact that it's now possible to describe an app and be using it in minutes later has changed my life for the better in a way I wouldn't have guessed possible. Way back in the 1890s, Mark Twain's friend Charles Dudley Warner said that everyone talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. For decades, the same was true about software. Now, we have no excuse. Okay, so think about this for a minute. Let's let that sink in. This guy decided that all the available word processing apps just weren't doing what he wanted. So he used generative AI, or Gen AI, in this case Claude Code, to build an app to his custom specifications. And, crucially, it worked. I think I've mentioned this concept in passing on this show recently, or maybe it was in the patron-only podcast, I don't remember. But this is one of the aspects of Gen AI that I find the most promising and just outright fascinating, honestly, in its implications. So let me put it to you this way. It will not be long before you, all of you, yes, you, like listening to me right now, will be making custom apps for yourselves. Mark my words. You don't need to know anything about coding. You just need to be able to describe what you want and be able to have an interactive conversation with basically an infinitely knowledgeable and infinitely patient LLM, or large language model. Chatbot, whatever you want to call it. I don't use superlatives often. It is against my engineering nature. But I am telling you this will happen. It's going to flip the software industry on its head. And frankly, it makes me glad that I'm retired. I would not want to be a software engineer in today's marketplace. Certainly not a junior one coming out of college. So this isn't just a possible or even a probable future. It is here. I am doing this right now myself. And like this author, I am loving it, and I'm honestly giddy about the possibilities. I've got so many apps I want to write. I am creating 100% bespoke apps that precisely meet my needs and have built-in features that are extremely valuable to me that would never in a million years be added to an app sold by some other company creating a single, universal version of an app for thousands or millions of other users. And like this author says, the fact that it doesn't have a whole lot of features that I care nothing about is also valuable to me. And for example, Microsoft is shoving Copilot, its AI, into everything. I don't want that. Or if I do, I want it to be private. And I can do that if I write my own app. Now, one of the things that you're going to need, that I have currently, to do this, eventually you're going to need someplace to probably run these apps, especially if they're web apps. Now, you actually can create your own iPhone apps or smartphone apps as well. That is something you can do. But invariably, you're going to need probably somewhere to store the data off on or some server to talk to. So that is something you'll need to set up, which is not as hard as it sounds. You can rent your own servers on the internet for $5 a month. And in many cases, that'll be powerful enough to do what you probably needed to do. But I also want to make another point before we go on to this final story, and that is that this is actually a generally positive thing for overall security too, because if you think about it, these apps will be privately hosted and perhaps unavailable for external attack. Also, the code will be unique. It's bespoke. We could have an infinitely heterogeneous set of apps instead of a nearly homogeneous set of like 2 to 3 apps where once a vulnerability is found, everyone who uses that app is suddenly at risk. But there are several perils with Gen AI as well. We're going to talk about one of them here. All right, there were several articles on this, including some from Anthropic itself, but Bruce Schneier does a pretty darn good job of saying things succinctly and yet covering all the bases. So I like his write-up on this. So we're going to start there. And he said, the cybersecurity industry is obsessing over Anthropic's new model, Claude Mythos preview, and its effects on cybersecurity. Anthropic said that it's not releasing it to the general public because of its cyber attack capabilities, and has launched Project Glasswing to run the model against a whole slew of public domain and proprietary software with the aim of finding and patching all the vulnerabilities before hackers get their hands on the model and use it to exploit them. There's a lot here, and I hope to write something more considered in the coming week, but I want to make some quick observations. 1. This is very much a PR play by Anthropic, and it worked. Lots of reporters are breathlessly repeating Anthropic's talking points without engaging with them critically. OpenAI, presumably pissed that Anthropic's new model had gotten so much positive press and wanting to grab some of the spotlight for itself, announced its model is just as scary and won't be released to the general public either. 2. These models do demonstrate an increased sophistication in their cyber attack capabilities. They write effective exploits, taking the vulnerabilities they find and operationalizing them without human involvement. They can find more complex vulnerabilities, chaining together several memory corruption bugs, for example. And they can do more with one-shot prompting without requiring orchestration and agent configuration infrastructure. All right, let me just unpack that real quickly and basically say, literally, the prompt for this thing was, here's some code, find me a bug. That was basically all they said, and it worked. Okay, 3, Anthropic might have a good PR team, but the problem isn't with Mythos Preview. The security company Isle, that's AISLE, and I talked about this a little while ago on the new show, was able to replicate the vulnerabilities that Anthropic found using older, cheaper public models. But there is a difference between finding a vulnerability and turning it into an attack. This points to a current advantage to the defender. Finding for the purposes of fixing is easier for an AI than finding plus exploiting. This advantage is likely to shrink as ever more powerful models become available to the general public. And finally, 4, everyone who is panicking about the ramifications of this is correct about the problem, even if we can't predict the exact timeline. Maybe the sea change just happened with the new models from Anthropic and OpenAI. Maybe it happened 6 months ago, and maybe it'll happen in 6 months. It will happen, I have no doubt about it, and sooner than we are ready for. We can't predict how much more these models will improve in general, but software seems to be a specialized language that is optimal for AIs. And I'm going to come back to that point in a minute. All right, just a little bit more here. He says, a couple weeks ago, I wrote about security in what I called the age of instant software, where AIs are superhumanly good at finding, exploiting, and patching vulnerabilities. I stand by everything I wrote there. The urgency is now greater than ever. I was also part of a large team that wrote a What to Do Now report. The guidance is largely correct. We need to prepare for a world where zero-day exploits are a dime a dozen, and lots of attackers suddenly have offensive capabilities that far outstrip their skills. Okay, so that brings me to my tip of the week. And again, I call this article AI's Promise and Peril. So as we've just seen, there are definitely pros and cons to all of this modern generative AI stuff that is coming out of the woodwork. Before I go any further, of course, I'm just going to stipulate once again, there are lots of other problems with AI. We're wasting a lot of environmental resources producing it, which we didn't have to do, but we did. We're training these models on a lot of probably copyrighted material without compensation to the people who created that. We didn't have to do that, but we did. And there are going to be other problems as well. We're going to talk about some of them here. But what I want to focus on today particularly is AI and coding, both from a positive side and from a negative side. So again, Anthropic just announced this thing called Claude Mythos. Well, Claude Mythos Preview, meaning it's kind of in early stages. And then they follow that up with this Project Glasswing thing where they're basically saying, look, we want to give this to the good guys first because this thing is so powerful. If we just let it out in the wild right now, it would be a race between the good guys and the bad guys, finding and either fixing or finding and exploiting bugs in the software that is running on hardware all around the planet. So the idea being that they're looking at very important open source software projects like OpenSSL, for example, browsers and other popular software, and some of it's proprietary. So they're giving it to Apple and Google and Microsoft and probably Oracle and some of these other companies with really big time software that's used by a lot of people that if something were wrong in that could cause really big problems. So they basically give it to the good guys first and say, okay, you've got a certain amount of time. In fact, we're going to donate some money for the cause, and you get to go try to find as many bugs as possible in your software using this tool. Now, that's a great move by Anthropic. Yeah, they're going to give away some money here, but it's basically like it's like, the drug dealer giving you the first hit for free. They are definitely going to be making money back on this in the long run. In fact, the US government, which was so crappy to Anthropic because Anthropic dared to draw red lines about how its software could be used by the military and basically blackballed them, is now coming to Anthropic saying, hey, what do you got there? We should definitely use that tool as well. So this is a massive PR win for Anthropic, at least at this point. And again, not to be outdone, OpenAI, who is the owner of ChatGPT, has also announced their new tool, and they're calling it ChatGPT 5.4 Cyber. And in their press release, they kind of took some shots at Anthropic without calling them out by name. But at the end of the day, they're doing the same thing. They're basically saying it's too powerful. We're only going to give it to the good guys first. They're just doing it in a slightly different way. So let me just stop to say that a lot of this sort of hype has been around for a while. And this whole notion of AI, being super dangerous has been around for a while. Since the debut of ChatGPT 3.5, which kind of kicked off this whole modern Gen AI race in late 2022, they famously put out this statement on AI risk that was signed by a lot of really big name people in 2023. And all sorts of these big time leaders, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, all the heads of these AI companies, and, some other thought leaders. I hate that term. How all these little sound bites. In fact, Elon Musk many years ago said that AI is going to be more dangerous than nuclear weapons. So they've been hyping this up as something super dangerous, but also powerful. And like nuclear weapons, could be also used for energy, right? It's an amazing but very powerful and potentially dangerous tool. So do these new products, in particular Mythos, does it live up to all this hype? Is general AI really that dangerous? Is it going to replace humans? Is it going to enable cyber bad guys to hold the world hostage? Are these chatbots going to become sentient and take over the world? So my answer to all three of those questions, at least, is probably not. At least not Gen AI as we know it now. There could be some other advancements, but what we have now is basically, despite all the amazing things it does, it is a word predictor. A very, very good one, and one that can extrapolate way out into many paragraphs. But that's under the covers. That's really kind of all it is. It has no sentience, even though people have fallen in love with their chatbots and worse. So there is no doubt that this technology is going to be, and already is, highly disruptive. But it is not sentient, so don't worry about that aspect of it. And like any disruptive technology, and we've had others, over our history, it will replace some jobs. It will, but it also will create others. And honestly, I still think in most cases, it's just going to make people more productive in their current jobs. Now, we shall still see it. There's certainly a lot of companies taking advantage of this opportunity to lay people off and saying it was because of AI, when in reality, it probably wasn't. Or at least there were many other factors. It was a convenient excuse. Okay, here's the point I want to drive in today, though. AI has one particular area in which it is supremely well suited, and that is coding, as in writing, reading, changing, and yes, exploiting bugs in software. Modern AI chatbots or large language models are really tailor-made for software because unlike, let's say, human spoken language, which is how you interact with these things, computer languages, the things that I, as a software engineer, use to write code that a computer will understand and then execute, computer languages are very tightly structured, they're unambiguous, and they're very well defined. And there's also a massive amount of example code out there for these AI systems to be trained on and learn from. Now, granted, not all of that code is good code, but most of it's at least working code. And crucially, again, something you can't do in many other areas where we're trying to use Gen AI, with software, you can also write tests for that software that you can run against your software to make sure that it works. You can actually grade your own output and tweak it until it works perfectly. All of this is doable by just a single large language model, but you could also pit them against each other or create several instances of them and pit them against each other and get even better output. Okay, so Again, I'm a software engineer. I have written code actually since I was very young. So it's been over 4 decades that I've written code. And I am here to tell you that these current AI models, not even Mythos, but the ones that I've been using that have come out in the last month or so, are astonishingly good at writing software and analyzing software. And this has caused no end of consternation among my colleagues. There's a great article that's linked to in my blog on this that you might want to read that illustrates the point. But even with just my buddies, we talk about this stuff all the time, in good ways and bad ways. And honestly, I don't know I've seen reports about what this Mythos stuff can do, but I have no trouble believing those reports and that they are exactly as good as they claim. Yes, there's a lot of hype. Yes, there's a lot of PR around this. Doesn't mean it's not true. But here's the key point. Even if it's not true, even if they are overstating the current capabilities of things like Mythos or ChatGPT's cyber thing, they will get that good. And it won't take long. I don't mean years, I mean months. This stuff is improving at a remarkable pace, almost exponential. And they're coming out with new stuff regularly. It is just amazing. So I actually support this idea. I think it's great, actually, that they're giving it to the companies to try to find and fix bugs first. I think that is smart. I think that is rational. I think we should keep doing that. And it's possible that maybe we should never release these things to the public or release just different versions that aren't quite as good. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is someone's going to do it. It's going to happen eventually. And someone will release it. And then everyone's going to have it, including the bad guys. So we can only hope that the benefit of these capabilities accrue to the creators of software, the good guys, over the defenders, in other words, over the attackers. But we shall see. We're going to find out soon. Folks, let me just go on record saying the next 3 to 12 months, I think in particular, are going to be a bumpy ride. There's going to be a lot going on. So I will be reporting on this more. But all right, let's wrap this up. What should you do? Okay, first of all, don't freak out. AI was always going to be used for good and ill. And, not or, and. There is no stopping it. It is out. It is not coming back. The genie has left the bottle. We have to deal with this. It will be disruptive. It's not going to doom our species, at least not the kind that's out right now anyway. But all software has bugs, and we've got a lot of software out there. The real problem I'm seeing now is that there's so much software out there already running on devices that will either be very difficult to update if fixes get found, or might be impossible to update, or it might be forgotten. They may not even be any longer supported, but they're out there running anyway. And if they're on the internet and exposed, these tools are going to find them and they're going to exploit them. That is honestly what I'm most worried about. We actually could get with these tools, and if everybody starts using these tools, and I don't see why they wouldn't, we might get to the point where software, when it's finally delivered and shipped for users, will be almost perfect, at least in the sense that it won't have software vulnerabilities. I think that's possible, and I can't believe personally that I'm saying that. If you'd asked me 3 years ago, I would have said no way. So anyway, we are already seeing attacks on critical infrastructure, and they convene this whole meeting of financial institution people, government and corporations, and we're basically saying, look, this new Mythos thing is going to be a problem, and we need to get our act together. So, nevertheless, what do you, personal citizen, consumer, what do you do? Okay, so really just keep doing the things we've already been talking about. I've actually written several articles recently that apply to this, so I'm going to refer you to those. But you need to reduce your attack surface. You need to get rid of devices that are no longer supported, or that have crappy security, or that you just don't need anymore. Just get rid of things that you aren't using or that you can't vouch for. Reduce your attack surface. Delete your online data wherever you can. All that data is just waiting out there on these old accounts you've forgotten about to be hacked and stolen and leaked and shared and blah, blah, blah. But it's even more at danger now than it was 2 months ago. Also, back up your important data. So if these bad things do come to pass, you are ready for them. You've got some robustness. You've got some resilience. And then finally, this AI stuff is everywhere. This whole agentic notion is really catching on, where you basically give full control of your computer over to these AI systems. They're not ready yet. They are not secure enough yet. Don't do them. I think eventually they'll be great. they'll make us all more productive. And there are ways, and I'm trying to do them myself personally. There are ways you could protect yourself and sandbox and silo and compartmentalize and make these things more secure. But that's not what most of these commercial products that you're seeing now, certainly not these overnight projects like OpenClaw, that just came out of nowhere and somebody vibe coded over a weekend. Just be very, very careful. I would recommend you steer clear of those things for now. But here's one last thing I want to encourage you to do, and it's going to sound counterintuitive. I think you absolutely should use AI. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, maybe, though that's Google, and hard to recommend anything from Google given their privacy problems. But, ChatGPT, Claude, Proton's Lumo is another great one. It's very private. And there's free versions, I think, of all of those. But find some, play with them, see what they can do, and also what they can't do. Find some things you know a lot about and ask them to tell you about them and see how well they do. And then this is the crucial part that a lot of people miss. This is not like a web search where you put in a query and get a response and you're done. These chatbots have a memory, have a context. You just keep talking to them. Go off on a tangent. Ask more questions. Ask follow-up questions. And here's a great one. Ask it to ask you questions to probe what you want to know. Maybe it'll trigger some thoughts in your mind. It's a conversation. So get out there, try these things out, get a grip on what they are like and what they do. And just realize that no matter how human they sound, they are not human at all. There is no conscience behind those words. It sounds like it. It can imitate it extremely well. Just make sure you fully understand and don't be beguiled by these chatbots. Oh, and then obviously don't give them private information. Don't tell them anything you wouldn't want to show up somewhere else on the internet later. Proton's Lumo is good if you've got something private you want to talk about, if you go there. But generally speaking, don't be uploading financial documents. Don't, give them access to a lot of things on your computer. Don't tell them very personal information or start asking them to be your therapist or whatever. It will gladly do it, but I would be very worried about where that information might end up. Okay, guys, we're going to be talking about this a lot. If you've got questions, you feel free to email me, and maybe what I can do is try to work those into future news shows and interviews, honestly. I need to do more interviews about this as well. So anyway, be prepared for more of this in the future. I'm serious. This next year, 2026, is going to be nuts. There's going to be even more crazy AI stuff coming out. All right, so there's your news and your tip of the week. All right, we're running long, so we're going to cut it short here. My Merlin's Musing topics for my top patrons, which will come out on Thursday mornings as usual. I'm going to dig into this AI stuff even more, but from a more technical perspective and also from a much more personal perspective with me being a software engineer. I've got some other insights that I think my patrons will find interesting. So anyway, that will happen on Thursday as usual. And then looking ahead, next week will be my third interview with Carissa Valise about her book called Prophecy. Will be available for purchase tomorrow, April 21st. And of course, you can pre-order it now. I've read it. I was lucky enough to get a pre-release version for the interview. It is another great book, and it's got some really interesting points in it. It talks about prophecy and AI as a predictor and what are the sociological and even political impacts of that. There's a lot of very interesting points in this book, and we're going to, of course, talk about them in our interview. You'll hear that next week. But if you like that, you'll definitely want to read the book all the way through. And then after that, another amazing woman and author. I just finished up interviewing Cindy Cohn. She's the director of the EFF. She has been since, over 10 years now. And she's been a lawyer with them for even longer than that. She's got some amazing stories, and it brings up some really timely topics as well. Her book is called Privacy's Defender. You can actually get that right now. And we use that as a starting point for a really interesting discussion. She's a great person. I'm so happy. I've been wanting to interview her for a very long time. That will be the interview after Carissa. All right, that's it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your garbage day.